Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Tab Sleep Clever, and today we're going to be covering a lot of different portraits from master painters to see how they use dynamic symmetry. And this was suggested in the comments below, so if you have any other artists that you'd like to see, make sure to leave a comment below and I'll see what I can do to dig into them. But we've got Rembrandt, Raphael, Holbein, Frans Hals, and Da Vinci, and we'll just start with Rembrandt. But imagine you're these guys back in the day and you're taught this secret method of composition and design, and you're taught how to use dynamic symmetry, but you're told to keep it a secret. If we don't have them teaching us how to use dynamic symmetry and how they used it in their paintings, all we have left is these breadcrumbs left for us by other artists and other authors that wrote books about the topics. And the further we dig into this stuff, the more we discover and unveil, kind of like a detective or an archaeologist that just keeps digging and uncovers new material and creates tools to dig further and discovers new things. So that's what we're doing here, and I've got all the grids lined up. I'm not going to show you the exact configuration, and what that means is just basically these grids. This is the 5/4 MAD. And these grids can be used in specific ways, like we have a computer now, but back then they could have drawn them differently to be different configurations to fit the design that they're going for. But right now we're just going to take a look at the diagonals within the image, compare them to the grid that fits this specific ratio of the painting. And the way I found the ratio is I just use this marquee tool right here, and I can drag down. It gives me the pixels on the right side here. 2404 and 2968 are the pixels, so you just divide the small one into the large one and you get the ratio. So once you have the ratio, you go into the dynamic symmetry book, and this is another breadcrumb that's kind of left behind for everybody to use, but I created this list of ratios that were covered within the book, but you can go through easily and find out which ratio is closest to that image, and that usually gives you several different options so you can try it out and discover which grid the master used. So the ratio of this painting gave me the ratio that was closest to the 5/4 grid. So once we align that to the painting, we can see, we just look really close so we can see the shoulders paralleling, and if we move these down, we can see how it's paralleling this exact diagonal, okay, down here too. And this too, we can see how it's paralleling on the shoulder here, and then he curves it down. But this shows you how the diagonals are cluing us in on the dynamic symmetry grid that the master used. We'll also look for other areas that are locking in or paralleling the grid. So these grids can be broken down, but if you want to use multiple grids, it's usually best for if you have a lot of details. Like this area doesn't really have that many details, but the masters can draw these in certain areas. Like say they only have details in this upper left corner, they can draw smaller grids within there to help them organize the composition. But if we have all these on just because we can, we have a computer, so it's easily for us to do. Just grab the grids and multiply them. So when we use these smaller grids in here, we start to create lines within these eyes. So every intersection point is an eye. This one right here is an eye. All these intersection points are eyes, and you can use those to draw additional lines if you need to. But when we add these smaller grids, sometimes it just adds a line right there through the eye so we can better organize our composition, or if we're analyzing master paintings, we can use it to discover where they plotted the different elements within their composition. So that's always great to have. And when these are aligned, we can see certain areas locking in right here. See how this man's wardrobe, the cloak he's wearing, is locking in on that vertical. You can go around, but this isn't the exact configuration, but I'm just showing you these, how some of this stuff is locking in and paralleling. Right here, the finger locking in on that vertical. This metal on his chest is locking in right here. The bottom of this cloak here. A lot of different areas locking in for such a simple image with minimal detail. Up here, this area here, this horizontal is locking in. The eyeball crossing there. Eyeball here. This up here, the hat. Okay, so let's keep going. Once you analyze master paintings over and over again, you start to see the same clues appearing, and that is telling you that you're on the right track and you're starting to hone in on what these guys used to organize their compositions. Right here we have the same exact diagonal right here on this cloak. If I slide this over, you can see that it's paralleling that exact diagonal. Right here is locking in, collar around his outfit. Here's lining up there. He's got the eyeballs on that horizontal, which are on that polar point. This is a polar point where the major diagonal is intersected by the reciprocal diagonal right here. If we look at his arm down here, turn that on and off, we can see how it's paralleling here and locking in right here and here. Turn it on and off. You can see it's locking in there. The best way to understand how dynamic symmetry works is just to try and use it, apply it to your own art. And I've used this in painting, and I understand you can't really get it perfect and mathematical when you're trying to transfer drawings and paint, and things aren't always going to be perfect. So if the line here isn't mathematically 100% perfect, we can attribute that to just the whole process of aligning, drawing out the lines, painting. It's not a perfect process created by a computer, it's by humans. So let me add these other lines on here. We can see also down here was lining up on that, just the MAD right here. And then when we put the MAD on, see what else is lining up. The hat up here is on that horizontal. Right here is lining up on the vertical. The hand right here, see how it's locking into that vertical there. And then basically the whole arm and hand are encompassed by that grid system right there. So if you're drawing on a piece of paper or whatever, you just touch as many lines as you can, and that's it. That's where he's putting his hand, right here. And the reason we use the grid is to promote unity, movement, and repeating diagonals, dominant diagonals, which creates visual impact. The repeating ones create rhythm. Let's move on to the next one. So already we've looked at two paintings, and we see the same exact use of dynamic symmetry to organize the composition and paralleling diagonals, and we'll continue to see that throughout many different artists. So look at this shoulder. If we move this down, we can see how it's paralleling exactly to that line. This shoulder right here paralleling that exact line. Okay, so anybody that's skeptic of dynamic symmetry, all you have to do is kind of investigate, use the grids, learn more about dynamic symmetry, and you start digging into these masters and you start to uncover what they actually used. Right here is lining up and locking into the grid. Right here is the horizontal. Right here, this area here. If we move this across this grid, you can see how this whole line right here is paralleling that exact diagonal right here. His eyeballs, the bottom of his eye on that horizontal. The hat, this isn't locking in perfectly, but when you're painting, you can start a line. If you don't want to lock it in perfectly and have it look all cubist, you'll create these lines and have it come back down and lock back into the line. And this is locking in there. So that's how you can use these grids. This is coming down, touching this line. You can see the curve of the hat there coming down across this line right here. Okay, so that's how these masters are using dynamic symmetry grid. See more lines. If we add more lines, we can start to see that this is actually locking in there, the shoulder. This line actually on the hat. See how this diagonal is coming across? If it's extended across this, it's locking in that hat perfectly right there. So this isn't the exact configuration, the organization of these smaller grids, because you can make them even smaller, if you need to, but this is giving us an idea of how they use the grid. But if you like this kind of stuff, please check out the links in the description below. I make things for artists to help them surpass their plateau and reach the master level, so check that out when you can. I really appreciate all the support. And here's another one. You can see the exact alignment of the hat here, locking in there, the hair locking in here. This is one of his better ones where it's locking in really well, and we can see this one definitely is paralleling that diagonal there. Get the collar right here. If we turn that on and off, you can see how it's locking in there perfectly to that diagonal. This shoulder here is paralleling the diagonal. You can move this up and see how it's paralleling right here. This shadow creased area right here is locking in. You can turn that on and off right here. The eyes, perfect right there, locking in. The nose, this eye is on there. Look at the forehead right here. Perfect alignment. You can add more lines if you need to. If he's got details in the background he wants to lock in and organize. So when you're using the grid, you're also like promoting coincidences, which creates movement and unity. So if you use the grid to align something up here, say you're adding a bird or whatever, and you've got this eye right here, right? Two diagonals crossing creates an eye, this intersection point. And we run this horizontal up, and then we create this bird touching that. We're getting a movement from here to here, so it adds nice movement. You can even align it to the top of his hat, so you get even more movement. So that's just ways you can create movement and unity just by using the grid and aligning things to the grid. Okay, so let's look at Raphael. I set another great example. See the grid there locking in perfectly right here on his hair. This is the root 2 grid, locking perfectly in on the hair there. You can see how the edge of his hair here is locking in. The hat, you can see the diagonal of the hat paralleling that diagonal. Right here it's locking in. Right here is locking in. The edge of his face right here. Top of the eye. The mouth right here. The lips. The nostril. The hair is diagonal here, locking in there. There's a vertical here, locking in the darkest part of the hair on the right side. His shoulder, you can see how it's paralleling this diagonal right here. The thumbnail, look at the thumbnail, perfectly locking in, exact diagonal. The knuckles, see how the shadow and the light of the knuckles locking in there. The cuff right here, locking in. Even the shadow area of this crease, locking in on that diagonal. A lot of different areas on this one. That's Raphael. Here's another one. This is the root 5 overlapping MAD 40, and all of these are configured to the ratios that were found in the back of the dynamic symmetry book, and the grids I created are just easy to use. You can configure them however you want, and most of them are from the ratio guide from the back of the book. But you can see how this one has those exact diagonals in the cloak here. This guy's cloak. If we move the grid around, you can see how it's paralleling right here, right here, his back, his hair right here. This exact diagonal, if we move it over, so that exact diagonal, aside from the little waves, but you can see the shadow shapes creating that diagonal. So even in his hair strands, if you look even closer, you can see the diagonals there. The edge of his ear, the bottom of his ear, this edge of his ear right here, all that's locking in. The hat right here, locking in. Turn it on and off and see how it's locking in there. The side of his face right here, look at this side of his face when I turn that on and off, locking in there. Same with the nose, the bridge of the nose right here, and the edge of the eye. Same with the edge of the eye right there and here. So a lot of different areas locking into this specific grid right here. That's that one. Another one by Raphael. Move this down, turn it on and off. This shoulder's locking in. The stitching on this looks like it's paralleling this diagonal. This whole side right here is paralleling. If we move it down, we can see how it's paralleling perfectly. The eyes on the center part. A lot of these portraits, though, you'll see the eye right on the center. I've heard that's because that when you walk around the painting, it kind of looks like they're still staring at you. But we've got the bottom of the nose locking in. And we can add more if we want to see if they organize the smaller elements with the smaller grids. We can see that is when these are added, the shoulder is actually locking in there. Bottom of the chin, I don't know if I said that already, but you can even organize these smaller buttons on the grid. Like this one's on the horizontal there, and this one's on the vertical. This one too. Here's another one. Eyes in the center there. Her cheek is locking into that sinister diagonal. Look at the fingers. If I slide this up, the fingers paralleling this diagonal. So these are all different clues we can hone in on and just see that they actually did use these grids. And the configuration is probably different, but the actual grid is the correct grid. And we can tell because the diagonals of the grid match up with the diagonals of the painting perfectly. So that's how we can start to hone in on their little secret. And when these are added there, we see the left side of her face here. It's locking in there perfectly. Got the edge of the lips. This side of her neck is locking into that line of the major area divisions right here. You just keep looking around and you'll start to see how things are locking in and lining up. And you can try different configurations if you have the grids available and are into digging deeper into these masters. This is aligning perfectly right here too, the edge of this, and then the diagonal of this crease going in that direction with the shadow and the highlight there. This edge is locking in there. Here's another one. We don't even have to move the grid. We can already see that it's paralleling this diagonal right here. Same with this side. This collar is locking in. The hat is locking in. The eyeballs just to the right of that center line there, locking in there. The hat right here is locking in. And when I say locking in, I'm not saying it's perfectly mathematically locking in, but he's an artist and he's drawing it to kind of hide the blocky look. If you use the grid edge to edge perfectly, it's going to look blocky, but he's hiding it with a slight curve there. Right here is locking in, right here is locking in, and then when we add the other grids on there, we'll find other areas. You can see how the edge right here of the cloak is locking in, down here too, it's all locking in there. He's got this line touching, like I said, he draws the curve up to kind of hide that blocky look, and then comes back down and touches the line again, and then curves around this way. This horizontal is locking in. If we look closer, there's the grid, the line's perfectly on there. Same with this line right here, perfectly on there. Okay, so we're on to something. Any skeptics should already be like, whoa, you know, their minds should be opening up and they should start to see these masters as using these tools to organize their composition. This is another one. See how the finger's locking in perfectly there, the diagonal of the finger. The hand is going in this direction, paralleling this diagonal here. The chest right here, the edge of that blouse. If we move the grid over, we're paralleling that diagonal. This hat, whatever she's wearing up there, it's paralleling this diagonal. Move it over and we can see how it's the exact diagonal. Same with down here, locking in. This finger's locking in on the horizontal. add more grids, and we can organize smaller details if we need. Got the eyebrows locking in there. The eyeball it's right in the center as well. The hair, look at this edge of the head and the hair. Perfect diagonal right there, locking in. So that's Raphael. Let's go to Holbein. You can already see this one paralleling this diagonal here and here. Just got to move it to prove it. Right here, see that? And then over here. And then this edge right here. Okay, eyeballs locking in. I'm going to move through these guys real quick because he's got a lot of them. But we can add more grids on there if we need to further lock in everything. This one, locking in on the vertical there. That's the polar point right here. This major diagonal meeting the reciprocal diagonal creates that polar point. Drop a vertical in there. The collar locking in there. This diagonal of the necklace, if we move this over, you can see how it's paralleling there all the way up down here, and then he trades sides. Say if you're drawing this line right here, right, and you start on this side of the line and then you switch sides and then you start drawing on this side of the line. So that's what he's done there. That's all locking in and paralleling that diagonal. Got more lines there. You can see how this is locking in even more now. We got this collar locking in perfectly right here. It's a 4/3 grid. Look at that diagonal locking in perfectly and paralleling. Right here is locking in. The chin is locking in. The mouth, the edge of the mouth, the eyeball, edge of the eye right here. These lower lids right here, locking in. And then you can add more grids. Right here is locking in the edge of the beard and the neck right here. The ear, zoom in on that ear and see how the diagonal is perfectly aligned to the ear. Here's another one. This is the root 6 and they're stacked and then they're turned sideways. So normally in cinematography we'll see like maybe one of these for the screen, but these are 2 stacked. That fits the ratio of this painting, and we can see how our chin's locking in there. And then this diagonal here in the headdress, if we slide this grid over, you can see how it's paralleling perfectly right here and then perfectly right there too. The forehead's locking in with the hairline, fingers paralleling there, locking in right here. If we slide this up, we can see the fingers paralleling right here, and then it's locking in there. More lines if you need, locking in like the smaller details like the eyes. But that's it for this one. I'll make a part 2 for the rest of Holbein's paintings, and then Frans Hals and Da Vinci, and then we'll be done with this one. But stay tuned for a part 2. Thanks for all the support. I'll talk to you guys later.